Welcome everyone to Not That Media. My name is John, and in today's video I'm going to be doing a very special unboxing and discussing and giving my thoughts on the latest in an ongoing horror documentary franchise from Creative VC. So come along with me as I unbox and discuss In Search of Darkness 1990 to 1994. If you're new here, firstly, thanks for finding my video. Please consider liking and subscribing and checking out all my other videos. If you are an ongoing viewer and a subscriber, thank you as always, faithful viewer, for joining me. Yes, as discussed, I'm going to be talking about In Search of Darkness 1990 to 1994. This is an ongoing project from Creative VC, who create some fantastic deep dive documentaries, not only in the world of horror, but a little bit in sci-fi, and an upcoming future video to keep an eye out for, horror video game franchises as well. So really excited to be able to continue to support this ongoing franchise. I have the item here that has come through today. So what I thought I would do is I would just give you a little bit of a background, bring you up to date obviously in terms of what this franchise and series has been all about, and then give you the unboxing. So as I briefly go through each of the prior installments of In Search of Darkness, I am also going to show you not only the physical release that came with it, but also any additional Kickstarter crowdfunding supporting items that were provided as well. So for those of you who are not in the know, In Search of Darkness started in 2019 with its original physical release, which has subsequently become available to stream on Shudder at the time of recording, called In Search of Darkness. This was, as far as I'm aware, and I may be wrong, designed to be a one-part definitive deep dive into the world of 1980s horror. It charts from 1980 all the way through to 89, and it is a veritable who's who of not only films that they cover, but also the actors, producers, directors, makeup artists, musicians, all kinds of people, YouTubers, etc., who all contributed to this absolutely fantastic 4.5 hour documentary. So this was released, as I say, as a Kickstarter project, or more actually appropriate, a crowdfunder. If I refer to it as a Kickstarter, please don't correct me in the comments. It's just easier to say Kickstarter. And this was, from what I understand, a very big labour of love from the guys in charge of this. They covered dozens of films, went through the whole history of 1980s. If you knew about it in the 80s, the first part kind of covered the top level. So, you know, your Nightmare on Elm Street, your Reanimators, your They Live, all that kind of top level stuff that is synonymous with the 1980s. It's a fantastic talking head documentary, and it's also a fantastic way to, if you're a collector like me, not only have fun recognising and learning stories about your favourite franchises, but also finding recommendations and also things to avoid as part of 1980s horror. So this came out, as I say, to a modest success, I believe, or it actually did very, very well. The Kickstarter or crowdfunder that came with it did come with two posters. I'll show you the first one now, which is the alternative artwork, which I really like, which, as you can see, sorry to not do a very good job of holding this up, but like you can see, instantly, if you're an 80s horror fan, you can see exactly the films that they are talking about in this one. You've got, you know, everything: Killer Clowns, Hellraiser, Phantasm, you know, Halloween, Pet Cemetery, Pumpkinhead, to name a few. So that was a really cool one-off poster that came with it that I was very happy to get my hands on. And then what has become the iconography of the franchise, which is the image of the little boy sitting in front of the TV. The alternative, or the more traditionally recognised poster artwork for In Search of Darkness was provided as well. You did receive a copy of the digital soundtrack, a digital copy of the film to watch, and also your name in the credits. So really pleased to back that up. Now, obviously, in the interest of covering this properly, I do want to recognise the fact that I actually have two copies of this. Both did come in a 11mm slimline case. This one's actually in a 14mm, so when I put them next to each other, you can see this one's slightly thicker. Reason being is, I'll explain that later, but this was pressed and came out, I believe, from China or Japan, and when this one was delivered, it was of, I'm going to say, an inferior quality. The poster, rather than having the fantastic you know, poster bags and coming in these fantastic hard boxes like this, it essentially came in a carrier bag, and the poster was folded up and thrown in. And numerous people, myself included, did complain to Creative VC to say, look, we were expecting a premium copy and we didn't get it. Now, when you look at the two next to each other, and I don't know how well my camera will pick up on it, they do look virtually the same, but this is actually printed on inferior quality paper, and the discs inside as well, you can see straight away, I can see, it might be difficult to see it on the camera, but what may look virtually identical in terms of disc, there actually, you could feel the quality on the disc wasn't quite the same as well. So Truth be told, obviously, In Search of Darkness very sadly did have a little bit of a bump in the road to begin with, but they did, to their absolute credit, find an alternative supplier, an alternative printer, reprinted the whole lot for all fans. So yes, I do have 2 copies of the original version of In Search of Darkness. It says on the back, just to go through it with you very quickly, compelling critical takes and insider tales of the Hollywood filmmaking experience drive In Search of Darkness, a 4+ hour documentary that delivers unique perspectives in the decade that gave rise to some of horror's greatest films and franchises, told by the experts and icons who influenced the modern landscape of the genre of cinema. I won't read the rest of it, but this is, if you're a fan, and I'll touch on it I'm sure later, but if you're a fan of those kind of horror documentaries, to name a few, His Name Was Jason, Crystal Lake Memories, Halloween 25 Years of Terror, The Nightmare on Elm Street Legacy, all those kind of bumper documentaries that really go into a deep dive. This is on par, if not for me, this whole franchise, just to show my hand very quickly, is the cream of the crop when it comes to behind the scenes documentaries on horror. If you are looking for those kind of deep dives, those insider stories, this is where to start. So that was In Search of Darkness Part 1. But that wasn't the end of the road for In Search of Darkness Part 1, no. There were actually, in tandem with the standard edition, a number of collector's editions also released at the same time. Now, ironically, and a little bit of side fun, I actually backed In Search of Darkness 1 immediately. As soon as I saw it, I can't remember where I saw it. I think I saw it advertised by maybe the Angry Video Game Nerd, if my memory serves correctly. I remember he plugged it because he was involved and he's on the documentary. So, having found out about this documentary, it was an instant pre-order for me. But a few weeks later, I then discovered that there was not only the standard edition, but a number of collector's editions, including a Corey Taylor edition. I think Elvira had an edition, and a couple of others that I can't remember. But there was one that stood out to me because, and I still am to this day, I'm a very big fan of Dead Meat. And if you're not aware of Dead Meat, it's a now husband and wife couple who do all things horror. They do the Kill Count, they're synonymous with Kill Counts, and they have the ongoing podcast and YouTube franchise. They're both fantastic. And as a result, as part of the first wave, there was In Search of Darkness 1 Dead Meat Edition. So, as you can see, in difference or comparison to the standard, a very different cover, but keeping somewhat of the iconography down here at the bottom. This one obviously is just the standard, but this one does actually recognise itself as a collector's edition. The main difference between the two, I will just read this out to you right now, is that it says, journey through the greatest decade of horror with James A. Janice and Chelsea Rebecca as your personal guides. In this limited edition run collector's edition of In Search of Darkness, featuring more than 20 minutes of exclusive bonus footage, the Dead Meat personalities are joined by 80s icons, modern horror greats, and popular horror influencers in an exploration to the most fun and fascinating time periods of genre film history. This is essentially the same documentary, virtually identical, but the difference is it has a number, about 20 minutes worth, as it says, of intercut extra pieces in which James and Rebecca sit down and talk about why they loved that particular year and giving their own personal recommendations. The disc as well had its own particular cover as well. It also had, and here's what I found just now, obviously it also came with the art card of the poster I showed you before. But one of the things I quite liked about this edition, not only obviously it was quite cool to see that Dead Meat was getting a little bit of recognition, always cool to see any kind of YouTuber, particularly at this time as they were relatively up and coming, being featured prominently on any kind of physical media. We got in tandem with this DVD, or Blu-ray, sorry I should say, a Dead Meat badge, which I thought was quite cool. And also there was, as well, obviously as the standard posters, there was a exclusive Dead Meat poster provided as part of this set. So just as a side point, I'm not going to say anything else about it. It was quite cool just to see that there were other versions of the original In Search of Darkness. And as far as I'm aware, you cannot view the collector's special editions with the extra footage anywhere other than the physical pressing. And I haven't seen these re-pressed or redistributed. You can pick up all of the original In Search of Darkness trilogy from the website. Creative VC do put them all up, so if you have missed out on this, obviously you miss out on all the extras, you miss out on your name in the credits, and I think all the discs are all in one case as opposed to 3 separate cases, but you cannot get this as far as I'm aware unless you backed it back in the day. And so, as is always the case with a good horror film, the inevitable sequel would come out, and In Search of Darkness Part 2 quickly became crowdfunded and went into production. Again, I believe this one is free on Shudder to view, and again clocks in at about 4.5 hours. As you can see, for the second release, we ended up now with a fantastic outer case, of nice cardboard case, with the cool iconography and a new poster. We then have the physical case on the inside, which, as you can see, continues the trend of Part 1, in that you have the little boy still in front of the telly with obviously some of the more prominent characters from the 80s featured on it. So the back of this quite literally says, building on the hit 2019 super doc that Forbes called a scary good magnum opus, In Search of Darkness Part 2 is the continuation that dives deeper into the fabled practical effects decade of the 1980s. Packed with more than 4 hours of brand new interviews, this clip-filled nostalgia trip features 15 new faces, including Robert Englund, Nancy Allen, Linnea Quigley, and special effects wizard Tom Savini, alongside 40 plus returning experts and icons of the In Search of Darkness cast. So yeah, again, I don't want to say this in a negative way, but it is more of the same. It is another continued deep dive into the world of horror. However, for the physical edition, which was crowdfunded, they certainly did step this up a notch. We have the case, as you can see here. If I just open that up very quickly, we have now interchangeable covers. Anybody who follows my haul videos will know that I'm an absolute sucker for the interchangeable cover. The disc, the case, everything was a step up. It all started to look really good, really glossy. Not that the first one didn't, but you could see that the money was being reinvested back into the project, which I'm always grateful for as a horror fan. It's always good when people do a project and then you can see it pay off, obviously, when the physical media comes out. It's not always about the money. I'm sure that people did make a lot of money off this. I'm sure some people were paid very well because this is a very successful franchise, but it was great to see reinvestment taking place. So as well as obviously improving the quality not only of the case, including an interchangeable cover, now starting to do the cardboard case protectors from the outside, we also start to get the collector's booklets on the inside, which I'm a really big fan of. Any physical collector out there worth their salt, I'm sure like me, knows that any opportunity to have a nice little booklet inside your Blu-ray and DVD is always welcome. This first one, as it is the first one, is a little on the basic side. It's just got a few messages from the producers, the directors, a few images from the documentary itself, but again, a nice little thing to have. And there's a reason I'm saying it starts basic, because there's a feature in the later ones that I really love that I'll touch upon. But this was another really good welcome. As well as that, if you did crowdfund it, obviously once again naming the titles, you did also get your digital copy and digital copy of the soundtrack. I do believe the In Search of Darkness soundtracks are actually available to download on Spotify and are a fantastic journey into nostalgic 80s style music, obviously recorded in modern day. If you did crowdfund it, you do get a cool badge, which again is the iconography from the alternative cover of the ghoul reaching out for you. And as always, and with every single release, so this won't become as much as a surprise, but I will show them to you anyway, there was 3 posters this time, which I was really appreciative of. So again, part 2 came with the standard cover, which is obviously again the 2 with the little boy in front of the screen. We also get the alternative cover. Again, I do really like this. I don't have any of these actually up in my home because I don't actually have space for them at this point in time, but again, as a collector, I'm always grateful to receive anything. And the third poster I really like, and I kind of wish that there'd been a cover for this. Maybe there was, or maybe I missed it. Again, I was aware that there were alternative editions of this, but I didn't crowdfund, I didn't back any of those. I think again, for the second one, the Angry Video Game Nerd, James Wolfe, actually had a Cinemassacre edition, but again, these were not cheap releases. They are not cheap to back, and whilst they are fantastic quality, it does obviously get to a stage where realistically you kind of have to pick your side. Are you going to get the standard edition or are you going to get a special edition? Now, as much as I love the Dead Meat edition, it was one of those situations where I'm more than happy with the continuity of the originals, and I'm more than happy just owning one copy. The Dead Meat one was a bit of a special one. And so we then jumped to 2022, and even obviously with the global pandemic and everything else, that did not stop Creative VC from concluding what has now become the 1980s trilogy of In Search of Darkness 3. This was the concluding part of their documentary. Once again, In Search of Darkness Part 3 is a 5+ hour deep dive exploring a time when video filmmaking exploded globally, fueled by new distribution outlets on cable TV, multiplex theatres, chains, and the power of the VHS revolution in the 1980s. Packed with hundreds of clips, more than 70 interviews with horror icons and experts who share tales of filmmaking adventures and the horror movies they love, the long long-form documentary dives into 79 impactful and controversial films of the decade, from direct-to-video, shot-on-video, bottom-shelf favourites, to unsung drive-in and theatrical releases. Again, the outer case continues that iconography, obviously, of the In Search of Darkness. Really cool one of this one, which is kind of like a Grim Reaper ghoul-style character, digging up or maybe burying a lot of forgotten horror movies. I prefer to look at it as digging up forgotten classics. This one is a real deep dive, is what I will say to you people. This one, whilst part one covers effectively all the kind of, not Hollywood, but all of the easily recognizable icons and characters and franchises and things like that. Part 2 continues that trend by talking about the subsequent sequels and some of the lesser known films. This one I actually found really fascinating because this was the release, part 3, that really delved into the world of the video nasty here in the UK and those really bad, poor quality movies. Because for those of you who don't know these days, obviously back in the time of the video, when the video exploded, there were people who were able to go out in their back gardens and quite literally make horror movies over the weekend and could distribute them into video stores, could get local ma and pa video stores to stock their product, and word of mouth, collectors exchanging, tape exchanges and things like that. These kind of films got cult status from being word of mouth. So this is a real deep dive into the real, I keep saying deep, but depths of the 1980s. In terms of the Blu-ray, and just to speed up a little bit on this because I'm conscious of trying to keep this video relatively short, but I am showcasing 5 Blu-rays, or 6 technically, with the first one covering 3. So again, part 3 covers that trend. Again, we've got the 3, little boy in front of the telly, there's blurb on the back, which I've already read. The inside, again, it's another step up. I was really impressed with the quality of the disc. It's again just the standard iconography, but again, we get the interchangeable cover. So personally, because obviously the fact that all 3 of those continue that trend, I have kept these covers as opposed to those, because I never see, if you have a case that has the opportunity to showcase one cover, why hide the other one on the inside? So you might as well get double your money, enjoy looking at both when you take it out. Because personally, as a lover of physical media, there's nothing I love more than seeing the video art. And as you can see with these kind of things, I won't, you can freeze frame it at your leisure, but if you look deep enough, you can see so many different characters, things you've never seen before, and I find it really fascinating to look at those kind of things. So again, In Search of Darkness 3 continued the tradition of the book, and as I mentioned before, the difference with this one, which I was really impressed with, and again has become a fixture of the others, is whilst again it has the standard, thank you from the forward by different people and the pictures of who's in it, in the middle you get a fantastic checklist of films to see. So just to give you a flavour of the kind of things that In Search of Darkness 3 was covering, 1980, you've got Prom Night, He Knows You're Alone, The Boogeyman. 1981, Happy Birthday to Me, Hell Night, The Unseen. I'm only going to name a couple from each. I'm not here to list off the whole thing. 1986, Terrorvision, Rats, Night of Terror, Deadly Friend, Trick or Treat, the original Trick or Treat, not Trick or Treat. 1987, Witchboard, Blood Rage, The Gate, Slumber Party Massacre 2. 1988, Return of the Living Dead 2, Sorority Babes in the Slime Bowl-orama, Sleepaway Camp 2. So films that are much more cult in status. Again, on the back you get the fantastic image of all the different characters. I can see instantly without even having to look, we've got Angela from Night of the Demons on here. So it's really impressive to be able to see all those, whilst you get those horror fans out there, and I'm not here to bash anybody, but once you get those horror fans where they say, oh yeah, I'm really into horror, oh, what's your favourite film? Oh, Nightmare on Elm Street. It's kind of like, okay, come back to me when you've seen Night of the Demons and things like that. And I appreciate I've only started seeing Night of the Demons recently, but this is for the real collectors out there. One thing that I really liked that came with this release as well was this lifetime member card, in the similar vein as kind of the Blockbuster video rental cards that you used to be able to get back in the day. So obviously in the style of the videotape on the back, I mean, this isn't just something to stick in your wallet to show off and try to be cool and trendy. This does actually come with a QR code on the back. I won't show it because I'm not sure if the codes are unique, and I don't think they are, but as part of Creative VC's ongoing attempt to give us something different each time, this time we had this QR code on the back which does link to to their website, which does give various discounts and promotions that are running. I had a look at it before I started filming, and there's about 6 active promotions going on, 10% off this, 15% off that. So if you remember and you have this membership card, it's not just, it is a cool thing to show people, but it did actually have a practical reason as well. So it's really cool once again to see Creator VC rewarding that ongoing loyalty, ongoing purchases by actually including this little card, and I really like it. So once again, 3 posters came with it. We ended up with, unfortunately these ones are a little bit more crinkled in the box, but again, you get that video store looking front. So again, there's a lot of time spent talking about video shops and video rentals in this one. You get the other cover once again with the ghoulish gravedigger digging up those treasured horror movies from the past, and again you get the part 3 version. So again, some fantastic continuity. If you've got the room or you're inclined to do so, you could get all 3 of those collector's posters next to each other, kind of like you would see in a cinema or in like a film premiere. And it's really cool to be able to look at those kind of things. Now, one of the things that was slightly different as well is obviously because this was the conclusion of the trilogy, Creator VC also sold, I did purchase it, a unique collector's edition hardback case, which was designed to house all 3 of your In Search of Darkness collection. So again, I can't remember how much this was. It was a limited add-on, maybe £10 to £20 or $10 to $20 given for the exchange rate. But again, really high, good quality, really nice to be able to have these things. All 3 of them just slot in really nice and easily. And because the spines are the same, you do end up with that continuity on there. I have to be honest and say that because obviously I really, really like and support the physical cardboard cases that you can see here. For this particular one, I actually store my original 3 copies of In Search of Darkness inside one box. I mean, this doesn't actually say anything other than In Search of Darkness, the complete journey into 80s horror. So realistically, you could own the first one, buy this and stick a couple of your favourite horror films in with it. There's nothing to stop you. It would look up maybe a bit odd, but personally, I just like to have any kind of little extra like that. It's always cool to see a box set on the shelf. So that came as a special item. Again, I don't think you can get this anymore. I think it was a limited pressing. And so with a third crowdfunding project completed, 3 Blu-rays in hand with a nice little collector's box to put everything inside, you'd be forgiven to think that maybe Creator VC were going to move on to something else. I certainly didn't think about beyond the 1980s when it came to horror, but they were already ready to go. So nicely nestled inside the Blu-ray case for In Search of Darkness Part 3 was a nice little postcard to announce that In Search of Darkness 1990 to 1994 would go into crowdfunding production in October 2023. So when they announced In Search of Darkness 1990 to 1994, I was really excited because one of the very few criticisms I would actually give this horror trilogy of documentaries is the fact that all 3 of them follow pretty much the same narrative. They start in 1980 and go through to 1989. I was really impressed that for In Search of Darkness 1990 to 1994 that they did do the format change by telling you very clearly that part 1 of this ongoing franchise, and they haven't announced how many parts there are going to be. Some would assume 3, but at the time of recording, the new announcement has just come out that they are prepping In Search of Darkness 1995 to 1999. It sounds like for the 90s, it's only going to be a 2-parter, whereas In Search of Darkness 1980s was a 3-parter. Now, I think obviously because this was designed, the original release was designed perhaps as a one-off, and they wanted to put in as much as humanly possible and cover the whole 1980s in one release, and not that you could do something like that. I think parts 2 and 3 of the original In Search of Darkness was somewhat hampered by this format that they had to rehash each year. So if you are a fan of a particular couple of years, it means you'd have to buy all 3 releases, and you'd have to watch them all independent of each other. Now again, first world problems, we're talking about changing discs and pressing skip here, people. But the idea of moving from 3 independent releases that cover the 1980s as a whole, and then actually now moving to 1994, 95 to 99, it means that we actually can chronicle very specific periods of the horror 90s, which I'm really happy about. I was really impressed that they did that. Now, obviously, I crowd-backed this in October 2023. There was absolutely no question that I would not be crowdfunding this. I will back every single one of these In Search of Darkness franchises. There is no way that I would not want to have these on my shelf. As I say, these are premium items. These are cream of the crop horror documentaries. So I was really happy to back In Search of Darkness 1990 to 1994. And as I say, that was October 2023. And I am sitting here recording this at the beginning of February 2025. So these releases take about 18 months from, 15 months from finance to arrival. And they're always really worth the wait. So I have my box here. So I'm now going to jump into talking about In Search of Darkness 1990 to 1994. So once again with this backing, there are a multitude of items within it, and I will go through all that. The first, and because I've already gone through it in the detail in the previous release I'm going to talk about, is there is another of the In Search of Darkness lifetime member cards. Again, you know, it's one of those things where when I first saw it, I thought, well, why do I need another one of these? But then you have to think, obviously, potentially, there are collectors out there or people out there who are jumping on the bandwagon in the 1990s. Maybe they're not fans of the 80s, or they didn't have the opportunity to get this particular release or this particular item. So it's cool just to be able to own two of these now. I've got one for best and one to keep just, you know, hanging around in my wallet or just somewhere safe. But yeah, again, always welcome for these cool things. And it does still have the QR code on the back for the discounts. So continuing the trends of the previous release, I'm going to go through the other items first before I get to the Blu-ray, because I've got a little bit more to say about the Blu-ray this time and the documentary. It does contain the two posters. So once again, we have the new iconography, once again replicating the ongoing imagery of In Search of Darkness. But this time, as you can see, it's the same little boy in front of the TV, but now splashed around it is all those great early 90s icons. Very simple, very easy, and I'm such a big fan of any project that maintains its continuity. So really cool to be able to see this next to the 1980s edition. And then the alternative artwork, which is also the cardboard case on the inside, is again the same thing. I believe, again, I don't know if this guy is becoming a little bit of an icon. I don't think he has a name in any way, but this looks like, once again, the gravedigger from part 3, and possibly even the guy reaching for you in part 2, but he didn't have his top hat. So I'm pretty sure this is becoming some kind of icon for In Search of Darkness. But again, he's got the lantern, slightly Bray Wyatt style. But again, up here is alternative imagery for the 90s icons. And once again, if you're eagle-eyed and you know what you're looking at, you've got obviously Pennywise, Tommyknockers, you've got the Night of the Living Dead, Gremlins 2, Misery, Army of Darkness, Dracula, Jason, Return of the Living Dead, Subspecies, to name a few, The Crypt Keeper, to name another. This is a really cool one, and again, coming into the 90s, I think I'll give my views in a bit more detail, but actually it was refreshing to see that early 90s there was so much iconography and so many cool characters and monsters that maybe get slightly forgotten about these days. So another new item, which I must admit, it's not something that I would jump for, but I was really impressed to see, is an iron-on patch or a sew-on patch for denim jackets, or you know, whatever it is. Really cool once again though to see the iconography. It doesn't specify 1990, it just says In Search of Darkness. So again, another really cool little keepsake. I'll just keep this inside the Blu-ray case because I'm not somebody who wears patches or puts patches on things. But again, it's really cool that Creative VC, with every single release, seems to want to do something a little bit different and give you something a little bit different. If you're someone like me who's been covering every single release at purchase, it's nice just to have the same, you know, different things as opposed to the same 3 or 4 things coming through. So yeah, a nice little extra. So the last item before I touch upon the documentary itself is rather an interesting one. I really like it. I thought it was a really cool little way to say thank you from the producer and director of In Search of Darkness. Some people might look at it and think it's absolute nonsense, absolutely worthless, but actually if you're a physical media collector and a backer like me, I actually sometimes feel it's really nice to get that little bit extra, or just that one little item that makes you, you know, recognize what you have done and what you are doing. So what I'm talking about in this release is a certificate. An In Search of Darkness certificate, to be exact. And it says, the producer and director of In Search of Darkness recognise your outstanding participation to help preserve horror history. Horror films don't create fear, they release it. Wes Craven. And that's got printed signatures of, I assume printed signatures, to be fair. I might be wrong in that front. Looking at it, actually, I think it might actually be signed properly. The director and the executive producer, again, you've got the little boy on the TV. It's got that nice golden border. Again, this is, you know, this is card. This is, for all intents and purposes, a, quote, proper certificate. I really like it. I think it's really cool. It's probably not something I will stick in a frame and have on my wall, but it will certainly take pride in place in my collection, in my horror cabinet and things like that. So, again, just a really nice little thing. Didn't have to be included, but sometimes I actually really appreciate that little odd item or that little extra thing that stands out in this release. So, yeah, really nice. Okay, so let's get to the Blu-ray itself. The Blu-ray comes, once again, in its traditional cardboard case, which I'm really happy with. Again, it's nice to keep that continuity going. Always looks good on the shelf when you have those kind of things. The Blu-ray on the inside continues the ongoing trend of the theming and the iconography. Again, I won't spend too much time talking about this because I've covered it with the posters and the others, but the back of this one simply says, ready to explore the best of 90s horror. In Search of Darkness 1990 to 1994 delves into an era of genre evolution marked by grittier meta filmmaking, straight-to-video ingenuity, darker villains alongside horror franchise icons, and the birth of seismic digital effects, leaving no shortage of terror tales on TV, on VHS, the video store, and on celluloid at multiplex screens. So it has, once again, on the inside, the interchangeable cover, which shows you the poster that I've already mentioned to you. I won't go through that again, obviously, because I've covered that on the poster. And on the inside, we have another one of the books. So again, really good to continue that trend. Follows exactly the same format as before. Message from the producer, message from the writer-director. You get your film checklist on the middle, which I was really happy with. I did receive a digital copy of the checklist, along with a digital copy of the film, a copy of the soundtrack, and once again, naming the credits for all of these releases when you back them. So it was really cool to actually see. And one of the things that I do want to talk about when it comes to 90s horror, and particularly in Search of Darkness 1990 to 1994, is I think that as fans, we certainly like to push and claim that the 1980s was another, maybe not the golden era, because people like to talk about the Universal Monsters or the Hammer House of Horror era and things like that, but it was certainly a really, really popular era in horror. Certainly today, everything seems to want to rip off the 80s, thanks to Stranger Things and Fear Street and all that kind of stuff. 80s has this nostalgia here in 2025 that at the moment doesn't seem to be going anywhere. So when people think about horror in the 90s, I think it gets a little bit of unfair treatment. I think a lot of people like to say that the early 90s didn't have anything decent. It was all trash. It was all rubbish. And effectively, once the 80s ended, until Scream came along in 1996, 1997, I can't quite remember, there was no decent horror. In Search of Darkness 1990 to 1994 actually proves that wrong. And as a viewer of this 6-hour documentary, my wife and I sat down. I did get a digital copy in advance, but for me, you don't want to watch this until you've got a copy in hand. So I relented from actually watching it until quite literally this week. I watched it over 2 nights, 3 hours a piece, and I was actually really impressed with this particular version of the documentary. The others are great, but this was really impressive because actually, I think because the new format kind of truncates itself down into 1990 to 1994, it can only talk about 5 years. So effectively, you get about an hour a year with some wraparound subjects such as the rise of the home video store, the decline of the video quality, all these kind of things goes through it. It's one of those situations where it's got its wraparounds, but a lot of time is actually spent to kind of prove to you or reiterate to you that the 1990s had some really great early movies. Just to read a few of these off straight away, and again, I appreciate that some people might think that I'm talking absolute nonsense when I talk about these quote-unquote good films, but when I look back, and hopefully it'll flash up because I actually ticked off all the watch list, the digital watch list, to see how many of these I'd watched, and I had watched a lot of early 90s films, and not only that, I really liked them. So again, this documentary is really good for that. So you've got, to name a few, Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, Tremors, The Exorcist 3, Frankenhooker, The Night of the Living Dead remake, Jacob's Ladder, Child's Play 2, Stephen King's It, Misery, Silence of the Lambs, Bride of Reanimator, Sometimes They Come Back, Child's Play 3, Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare, The People Under the Stairs, Sleepwalkers, Pet Sematary 2, Twin Peaks, Fire Walk With Me, Hellraiser 3, Hell on Earth, Candyman, Ghostwatch. Ghostwatch is amazing. If you haven't never seen Ghostwatch and you're intrigued to find out about that, go and check out my 31 Days of Halloween, and there is a video on there for Ghostwatch. I really love Ghostwatch. Leprechaun, Army of Darkness, Hocus Pocus, Body Bags, Jason Goes to Hell, Needful Things, Return of the Living Dead 3, Night of the Demons Part 2, Phantasm 3, The Stand, Natural Born Killers, Wes Craven's New Nightmare, Frankenstein, Interview with a Vampire. So the early 90s for horror had quite, and that's not all of them, by the way, that's just me rattling off a few that I can see straight away and I have seen. It's amazing, actually, that this documentary does a really good job to actually prove, hopefully, skeptics wrong when people sit there and say there was no good horror in the early 90s. Everybody on this documentary is really candid. They talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. They go from proper blockbuster horror Hollywood films, say that 5 times, and then they go right the way down to independent filmmakers. There's some amazing stories. There's some really odd films in here. There's some really odd discussions. There's a whole piece about Necromantic 2 and how the director was prosecuted and all these kind of different things. There's some amazing little stories in here. And it's really cool to actually have a lot of these films, such as Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which has a little bit of a bad reputation as being the ugly stepchild in the Nightmare on Elm Street series. I disagree. I absolutely love that film. But it's really nice to see horror aficionados and icons such as Mike Flanagan sit here and talk about how these early 90s films, these early 90 years, were really informative and actually created a lot of the horror we're seeing today is actually reflected in this documentary about how actually, you know, your Mike Flanagan's, and I keep using him as an example because he's the easiest one to name drop. He was living and breathing all these early 90s Stephen King films, and Doctor Sleep and The House of Usher and all this kind of stuff would not exist if it wasn't for the fact that in the early 90s, as a relatively young man, he was watching these things and becoming absolutely fascinated by them. This documentary also, and I was really pleased with this because as a 90s kid, I was born in 86, so as a 90s kid, when I think about horror in the 90s, as a child, I think about Eerie, Indiana, Hocus Pocus, Goosebumps, Are You Afraid of the Dark, Tales from the Crypt Keeper, for those of you who will remember that. So this documentary also spends a good bit of time recognising the fact that the early 90s, was not only a hotbed for these fantastic films that people tend to forget about, but also it covered the rise of television horror and things like The X-Files and Twin Peaks and things like that. And it actually serves to tell you, you know what? The 1990s was not just about Scream. It was not just about Ghostface, and I Know What You Did Last Summer, and Halloween H2O, all these films that everyone turns around and says, well, with the exception of Scream, H2O, and I Know What You Did Last Summer, there isn't any decent horror films in the 90s. That's garbage, and this documentary really proves it. Once again, really proud to back this. I think this whole franchise is absolutely superb. You can purchase this still from Creator VC. I do think there is a limited run still for those people who did not back it. As I said, the other 3 I think you can now watch for free on Shudder. In Search of Darkness 1990 to 1994 is not available on Shudder yet because, of course, these guys need to be able to get their money back and obviously source the next release as well. So if you're looking to watch the 1990s one, I recommend buying the Blu-ray. You might not get all the bells and whistles, but the Blu-ray itself is fantastic. Out of all the horror documentaries that I have watched, I have backed, I have purchased, In Search of Darkness is the top. Absolute 5 stars. Cannot wait for In Search of Darkness 1995 to 1999. If they then move into the noughties and we get In Search of Darkness Millennium Edition, I will be there for this. If you're a horror fan, if you're a documentary fan, if you're a history fan, if you are a lover of the history of film, this is must watching. You don't necessarily have to buy it if obviously you're a casual viewer, but at the very least you owe it to yourself to go and watch all 3 of these documentaries In Search of Darkness. It's a long haul. Cumulatively now, In Search of Darkness 1, 2, 3 and 1990 to 1994, I think is clocking in at about 18 hours. So this is not something you can, but although I think you can actually, I'm going to contradict myself, you can, the way that this is built is it focuses on a particular year and then it breaks down each film. So if you like me and you don't have 6 hours to sit, I got a baby on the way, so sitting and watching 6 hours, movies sadly is going to become a thing of the past very soon. But actually, if you wanted to say, you know what, I'm going to sit and watch a year a night, that's a really nice episodic way of watching it. You can sit and watch 1990, 91, etc., etc. Get a few film recommendations, again, having watched this one. I'm walking out of it with a few films that I want to proactively look for now. It's great for new fans. It's great for old fans who want to go down memory lane. It's great for film historians who, like the certificate says, it's really important to remember these horror franchises and remember these horror films. In the world of digital, in the world of streaming now, I think there's so much choice out there that it's actually getting harder to actually find anything. As I'm sure everyone out there knows, I think you probably spend more time adding things to your watch list on Netflix than actually ever watching anything on Netflix. And a lot of these films that are in here, a good number of them you cannot get anymore, or if you do, you have to import them from America. So these serve as fantastic time capsules to preserve a fantastic time of filmmaking. Horror will always be king, in my opinion, when it comes to filmmaking. It doesn't matter how much money the Marvel franchises are making, or how much money Disney's making, or how much money Universal Pictures is making. Horror has always been the financial backbone of the industry, whether they like it or not. And there's a fantastic bit in this documentary as well, because I don't want to say too much, where they talk about the rise of the thriller. In my opinion, I always think that the thriller is a film that is horror, but because it's done well, or it's recognizable, or it has actors in it who have gone on to be great, they choose to call it a thriller. Silence of the Lambs, Seven, films like that, those are horror movies. I don't care what people say, but we mask them as thrillers. I think that horror will always be around. It will always be financially profitable. It will always hold up the industry for as long as it needs to. And again, I love these documentaries. Get it if you can. If you can afford to buy it, do. You can pick up the trilogy physically, like I say, from the website, but I think it's only in one case with 3 discs. eBay, you can look on eBay for these, but once again, these are premium collector's items, so you may be paying premium collector item prices. So buyer beware with things like that. I love this documentary. It will get multiple views. I'm very proud to have this all on my shelf. So thank you for joining me. Please do like and subscribe. Here's to In Search of Darkness 1995 to 1999. Creator VC, please keep up the good work. And until the next time, stay scared.
I'm John Carpenter, and this is In Search of Darkness 90s.